again? We're live. Hi, Gary. Welcome to Venture with Grace. I'm sorry
Great,
for the
great to
dramatic.
be here.
I'm sorry for the dramatic reaction. Okay, so I want to start with early on in your career. So I'm not super shocked by the Bear Stearns situation, but you were an operations director at Dole Food Company, the pineapple company. Can we get a little bit more of what's the context there? Like, how did that kind of shape you into being, the chairman of McKinsey in North America later?
Well, there's, as you might imagine, a lot of daylight between that role in summer of 1991 and
Right.
sitting here now in 2025. That was a summer job. I was between years of business school, and my wife and I had lived over in Australia before going back to school, and we had it in our head that it'd be fun to see what it would be like to be expats. And the Dole world then, and I think it probably hasn't changed now, is basically you started in a role like operations director, and then you moved up and eventually ran a country. And in that case, you always think of Dole as pineapples, but actually bananas was, and I
Mm.
think still is their big export. And so Dole was part of the original banana republics in Costa Rica and in Honduras, Nicaragua, and so we just thought it'd be super cool. At a minimum, it'd be a fun way to spend the summer. It turned out it was a great way to spend the summer. It was not the way we wanted to ultimately live our lives. And so it was a great experiment. I then went to McKinsey after business school.
Wow. That sounds like a amazing life. I think the first time I see Dole was in not the first time. Obviously, everybody see it in supermarkets, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was in Hawaii. Hawaii has like a dual pineapple
Well,
factory.
Lanai
But
was a Dole Island originally, way
oh, wow.
before Larry Ellison bought the island. Lanai was basically effectively owned by Castle and Cooke, the Dole company.
Wow, that's so cool. I like that. There's the travel and everything is involved. And okay, so I guess who do you consider as your personal board of advisors? Since I feel like you have been very successful at McKinsey and you have been there for 37 years. I'm sure you have other amazing opportunity that approach you and what make you stay. 37 years. Like we had people, we had the CMO of Deloitte was at Deloitte for 26 years. Now 37 really beating the number, but okay, sorry.
Well, yeah. So let me. There's a lot in your question. I actually joined McKinsey out of college
Mm.
as a business analyst, which was meant to be a 2-year program, and then you go to business school and maybe come back, and maybe don't. In my case, I joined. Then my wife and I took a year off and wandered around the world. Then went back to school, and then I rejoined after Dole in 1992. And so it's 37 years, depending on how you count the time. McKinsey gives me a little less credit, so the gold watch at retirement may be a little smaller since I was gone for those 3 years. But to your question about personal board of advisors, it's sort of a modern term. We used to just call them mentors back in the old days. And I've had a number at McKinsey that have been highly influential through my career, and they've evolved over time. What happens eventually, if you stay somewhere 37 years, for the 15 people in the audience that might actually choose to do that, eventually they retire, and then they think they're still relevant for another 5 years, but they're really they've got a year or two of shelf life. And so you ultimately have to create your own set of advisors that are, in my case, my age, more or less. And so my buddies from business school disproportionately have become that. It's funny, everybody talks about going to business school to create a network. In my case, it was just an incredible group of friends. And we've all sort of served as each other's therapy group, personal advisors, and most importantly, just friends.
Wow. Okay. So I wonder, what is one skill that you're constantly trying to get better at? It could be soft skill, like coding, or um.
But I'd call that a hard skill from where I'm
Oh,
sitting.
okay. Yeah. Wait, sorry. That's hard skill like coding
Yeah.
or soft skill like sales.
It
Sorry.
may be soft skill for your generation, but it's hard skill for my generation.
Yeah, it is hard skill. Sorry.
You
I
know,
think.
for me, and maybe it may reflect where I am in my career, but I would say the single biggest thing I'm still trying to learn is how to put myself in the shoes of the person I'm speaking with to understand what it is they're trying to accomplish. that if you think about what you're doing when you lead something, if you think about what you're doing when you're trying to compel a client to either take on a project or execute what you've talked to them about, if you don't have some sense of what is it they're thinking while you're talking to them, you end up approaching everything from your point of view. And I'm probably at least as guilty of that as anybody, maybe even more than most, because I've got a strong point of view about things. And I've had conversations with the people with whom I work. I've had conversations with my clients. I've had conversations with my wife where it's very obvious to me what I'm saying and why it's so compelling. And it's equally obvious at some point that they're not finding it compelling at all. And every one of those times it's because I'm not looking at it from their perspective. And once I flip that and start to think about what is it they're trying to do, I change what I'm saying and what I'm thinking.
Mhm. So basically giving them context and seeing from their perspective. I think that's a really good skill. Like a lot of people talk about like listening skill and just like I feel like seeing things from like other people's perspective. Okay, so I want the audience to see things from your perspective. Like, what does it look like to be the chairman of North America and McKinsey? Like, what's a day in your life look like?
Well, I should give you context. Chairman is a great sounding role, but the real job at McKinsey that I had for a number of years was being the managing partner for North
Mhm,
America, and that's very much an operational role.
mhm.
Chairman was the title they gave me when I finished being managing partner, and they said, "Well, we got to give him something that sounds good. That's a calling card for clients and makes him feel good about himself." And so I would say this role is much more of a title, and it's much more, as I say, basically a calling card when I go to clients. It says, well, not only does he have gray hair, but he looks like a pretty senior guy because we call him chairman. Managing North America. It's funny. I actually changed the name. It was called something a little different before, and I deliberately changed it to managing partner because I thought there was two things that were important. We're a partnership, and that's a really important thing, which means you really can't tell your partners what to do. You can inspire them, you can encourage them, you can point them this way, but in the end, it's partnership, and so you're responsible for managing it, but really in many ways you're leading it, and then you're herding the proverbial cats. And so day to day in that role was everything from bouncing around to our multiple locations around McKinsey to going to individual client meetings to help my partners and then still serving my own clients. And so it was, it's a cliche, but every day was completely different. It was one of those things I would start on Sunday and take a look at my calendar. So where was I going to be this week? And in the course of individual days, did I have a couple things that looked like there was no possibility I was going to be able to do that and do that at the same time, and then sort out how that was something going to work?
I have a question for you. So I see it like, I mean, obviously McKinsey is like a popular place to work. All my friends applied job there. Okay, so I think there's like two things. Like one thing is like I'm sure the audience who are young leaning towards like the younger generation, people want to ask you how to get a job at McKinsey. And then the other part of the question is like I'm thinking how do you succeed there? Because I feel like most people maybe taking like a 2 year role there and then like becoming very successful doing something else like in the venture capital industry or like private equity or whatever Google like strategic operation role or whatever. So how do you think about the career at a consulting firm?
Well, so the first part of the question is kind of easy.
Apply.
You have to apply.
Okay.
I mean, we do recruit people, and our competitors also recruit people as what we call direct hires. So people that come in with industry experience, sometimes at very
Mhm.
senior levels. But the vast majority of people that come to McKinsey come to us out of undergrad, out of business school, out of a PhD or a master's program. And it's pretty stunning. I think we get something approaching in some form or another almost 1 million applications a year for all the roles we have, everything from an executive assistant to a senior consultant. But so you got to apply. It helps to have a resume that's pretty compelling and a life story that matches that resume. And then after that, it's just an interview process. And, we still do the case interviews, but a lot less than we used to. But that was an original McKinsey invention of where you're given a business example and you try to solve through it in the course of 15 minutes. But there's a whole set of things we're looking for on the part of the people that come to us, not least of which is raw intellect, but a good part of it is just willpower, leadership skills, able to work with teams, all the stuff you might expect. After you're there, I would, at the risk of exaggerating, I would say 90 some odd % of people who come into McKinsey as a consultant out of school have no intention of making a career of consulting. Most of them are doing exactly what you said, which is it's a 2-year plus path to see a lot of stuff, learn a lot of stuff, post business school experience in many instances. And then somewhere along the way, you wake up and you go, God, I actually really like this. I think I'll stay for another 2 years. And then I think I'll stay for another 2 years. And then somewhere along the way, a number of people go, you know what, I think I'll make a career out of this. I wouldn't say that was, by the time I woke up and said I was going to make a career out of it, I'd already made a career out of it. It wasn't sort of a conscious thought at age 30, I'm going to be here. I'm 59 years old now. I'll be here, 29 years later. It just, it was every couple of years a recommitment to it because it was even more fun than the prior 2 years.
Love that. By the way, you look 40. Not.
Oh, you're nice to say. I'm going to save that particular part of this discussion.
Exactly, Cliff. But anyway, okay. So I wonder, since you have seen a lot of companies, right? So I think there's a couple of things I'm personally curious about. So for example, how does McKinsey function? So as a managing partner, so since you're basically, I guess, the CEO of the company, how do you think about who does what task, and how do you kind of measure each person's success at these companies? Is that based on retention of the customer, or how does, I guess, the business function even work within the system of the consulting firm?
Well, I'm going to answer a little orthogonally because I've had a number of roles at McKinsey, but one of which most recently was I was responsible for chairing the committee that evaluates all our senior partners. And there was a great line I attribute to John Hennessy from Stanford, although I'm not 100% certain he's the one that said it, but he was talking about academics, and the cliche with academics is you can't herd cats. And John said, yeah, you can't herd cats, but you can move where their feed bowl is. And in many ways, the way you manage within a partnership is, I talked about inspiring, and that's the critical thing, is inspire people to move to a particular direction and give them that direction and work with them to come up with that direction. But your other lever is you can move where the feed bowl is. So you can say, this is the stuff we value. You can choose to do what you want, but you're going to get paid based on whether or not we collectively have said we value it. And for us, that's always been very, very holistic. One of the great things I think about our firm, and we've recommitted to this for our partners, is we don't have revenue credits. We don't have an algorithm for measuring how you do. We look at the whole combination of which clients you're serving, how are we serving them, what kind of impact have we actually had at those clients, what's the experience of our teams in that. And I know it sounds a little fluffy, but it really is a very holistic way of looking at how a partner is performing. And then that echoes all the way down, to the first year associate. And so it's much less an equation and a formula and much more a whole look at what they're contributing to their clients, what they're contributing to the firm. And it's served us very well. It's very time intensive. So it involves a lot of interviews with the people with whom you work, a lot of interviews more broadly within the organization of who might you be touching. But the net of it is we end up, I think, with partners that are, I keep using the word holistic, but it's a good one in this instance, holistically committed to what we're doing as opposed to just angularly doing one thing within the firm.
Okay, so I wonder, this is a really huge jump, but what's your thought on AI? Just because, people are using AI to replace everything and anything from the law firms. People use ChatGPT to write contract all day, every day now. So how do you think about that apply to consulting, and what are something that you personally feel like AI is gonna change how people react to, like, or like how people evaluate businesses?
Well, so and you're right at I have a layman's understanding of AI, heavily informed by what my partners, who are much deeper. We started hiring PhDs to be doing
Mhm,
our algorithmic work in God, well over a decade ago, and then we bought a firm
mhm,
called Quantum Black, and then that became the engine around which we built all of our AI capabilities. I sort of think of AI as what I'll call, and I put quotes around it, old AI, the big
mhm,
data analytics models,
mhm,
and then what that could tell you about your customers and your own operations, and the new AI, generative AI, and its ability to both solve problems, generate code, generate work plans, et cetera. So we've embraced it. I mean, not that there was an option not to, but we embraced it pretty early. Uh, the first part of AI in how we served our clients, less how we did our own jobs. We used it periodically to analyze ourselves, but it was really much more of how could you do better customer retention? How could you change the whole factory flow based on a much better understanding of the data of what was happening along the operational line? And you could keep going through multiple examples. The moment generative AI kind of popped onto the scene, and it really did seem like magic. It was like one day it
mhm,
wasn't there, and one day it was. I'm sure it's
mhm,
like everything, it was a overnight sensation, multiple years in the making. We immediately started asking how could we use it to improve ourselves, and then ultimately how could we use it to improve our clients. And so we created something internally called Lily, and it's pretty impressive. I can now go in and say, write me a work plan for how to help a light bulb company in Poland change its supply chain in the context of a world where America may have more tariffs. And
mhm,
out will pop a reasonably useful outline of a work plan
mhm,
for how to do that project. And then you keep modifying it through prompts, et cetera. And so one of the big things we're training our people on now is how to ask better and better prompts. And I probably should have said this before, but I'm retiring
mhm,
in 2 months at 60.
mhm,
And one of the things I plan to do thank you, plan to do before I walk out the door is get that training for myself. And so
mhm,
it's going to be harder for me to get it from McKinsey once I leave, because I am 100% convinced that the ability to ask better and better questions from the AI engines we use and then work with that to move whatever I'm trying to do forward is going to be more important than the skill. I'm not going to ever learn to code in that way. I
mhm,
used code way back when in BASIC, so that, which is something your audience may not even remember as a language. This was
mhm.
pre-Pascal, pre-COBOL, pre-Fortran. There was BASIC. There was machine language and then BASIC. And but I think, learn to use better prompts, and that's a good part of what we're training our people on. And then the people
Oh,
behind the scenes are building the engine.
can someone tell me if we lost sound beside LinkedIn user? Thank you. Sorry. Okay, I don't think we lost sound. I did not. Okay. Okay.
Can
So
you still hear me, Grace?
I can hear you. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good. Then we're
yeah.
halfway
Okay.
there.
I think we're good.
Good.
Okay, hopefully. But anyway, so I wonder, love the AI part and then love that you're still continuously learning. One thing I wanted to ask is like, I feel like there's so many like, McKinsey have like so many clients in different industries. How do you guys keep on track of like these all different kind of industries, and then how do you prioritize? Oh good, okay, Thomas said we're all good. Okay, perfect. Thanks guys. Oh, it's back now. Thank you. Okay,
Okay,
great.
good. There's a
Shout
moment
out.
in time.
Well, okay, let us know. But if it doesn't work. But anyway, okay. So I wonder when you're thinking about, okay, I guess like what is the general question every industry have, or like when you're going into these different businesses, how do you identify what's their biggest problem? Because like as a consultant, obviously they like maybe chat with like everybody in the company, get a whole picture, yada yada yada. But like, is there kind of like a framework for businesses that they supposed to think? And is there like a common problem that like almost every company have?
It's funny. Back when McKinsey was founded,
Mhm,
going all the way back to James O. McKinsey, and then really
mhm,
Marvin Bower became effectively the godfather of modern management consulting. They used to have something called the general diagnostic, and it
mhm,
did it. And so companies would call us, or we would find them, and there was just a checklist. of here's all, we're going to go across your entire company, your entire operation, and figure out what we can do to improve you. I would say as consulting evolved, it became much more question answer. Here's a particular question. We think we have a pricing problem. We think we want to enter the Japanese market. We think our operations in this factory aren't producing what they need to be producing. And then we came back and gave them an answer. And it used to come in the form of a blue book. That was kind of the famous McKinsey product. It's called a blue book. It was a set of charts. This was before PowerPoint. And then it was go forth and execute. And what's happened over time is we've moved pretty dramatically from that model to an insight to answer model, where we help them figure out what the insight about the business, insight to implementation or insight to action, help them figure out what was going on with the business, and then move from that to, okay, now we're going to help you implement it all the way through. And so probably 70, 80% of our work comes because there's a particular business problem or opportunity that somebody has asked us about, as opposed to go in and just take a look at the whole company. But there's about 30% now that is back to that original model, where we work with a company where either something's truly broken across the company and we need to work with them to figure it out and fix it and then drive it through implementation, or they're doing great, but they really think there's an opportunity to transform and do even better. And it's not pick individual piece parts, it's take the whole thing on. And in that case, we'll come in and we'll do a 6-week unpaid diagnostic to help them figure out what are all the different levers they could do and what's the value of that. And then we work with them usually over a couple of years to attack the whole thing in partnership with them. So it's not done to them, it's done with them.
What does that sales cycle look like? You mentioned like it's like a 6-week unpaid diagnostic. It's kind of like a freemium model. So you go in and be like, yo, okay, I think there's like 5 things that went wrong. Okay, here's our 6-year plan. But like, how does a company actually react to it? And then obviously you have to say, hey, like, we forecast your revenue. If you fix this problem, you can like, basically become a $100 million tomorrow. But how do you kind of like, I guess like structure these like business deals too? I mean, obviously we don't have to mention any specifics, but like, what's the concept of like?
It really is bespoke, because it's everything from one of my private equity clients coming in and saying, we've identified a company, we're interested in buying them. We need you to work with us for 3 weeks. All hands on deck. Help us figure out everything from TAM to what the weaknesses are of the company, what could possibly go wrong, work through their operations, oftentimes outside in with data that we'll provide you from a data room. And boom, from that, we'll have a diligence product that says, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, or it makes sense at this price, and boom. That's one type of project. To the other extreme, which I touched on a moment ago, where we may even approach a company and say, we've looked at you from the outside. We think there's an opportunity to double the value of your company, but you're going to need to go through a process working with us that's going to take 1 year, 2 years, and we're going to work with you across all the different components of what you do, and we'll get paid based on that doubling of value. So, and I'm picking 2 different bookends, the 3-week sprint versus the 2-year, fully ingrained model, and everything in between. A lot of what we do is where a client asks us a particular question, and a lot of what we do is where we believe there's something that needs to happen, and part of our job is to compel them to believe it too, and then work together to execute against it.
Okay, so I like what you said about there's like the long term and then there's a short term type of problems. And like, since like, not all our audience can afford McKinsey, before they get there, like, let's say the startup founders that have 2 employees, like how should they kind of like examine themselves using the McKinsey philosophy to improve efficiency?
Well, so, there really is a difference between very small companies and very big companies. And I know that sounds obvious, but there's an assumption that one is just a microcosm of the other. And it's not quite true. I mean, really big companies have highly diverse, complicated workforces, highly diverse, complicated supply chains, multiple countries, et cetera. And, founder-driven startup at, pick your 2 people, 5 people, 10 people. The critical thing there is being very, very tightly focused on the mission of what you're doing and not getting distracted by other stuff, including consultants coming in to help you. And so, so what we do starts to become relevant when you've got a company. It doesn't need to be big. We work with a lot of small companies, but well beyond sort of an idea and a concept. And now we're trying to just get a minimum viable product to close enough to market. I think where we start to make sense, and I'm not saying this is a sales pitch, I'm more just how do you think about what we do? We start to make sense when you've actually got a company, not a concept, and you're starting to scale whatever it is you're doing, be it a product or a service, or even just the business itself. You're executing, but you need to now have more people to deliver against it. That's when we and our brethren start to become more useful to an entity. And we also do a lot of work with not-for-profits. We do a lot of work with governments, and all of them have different optimizing functions. But the commonality is they're big enough and complicated enough that there's a need to have an outside perspective on what you're doing. Beyond what you would get from your board or your own personal board of advisors, et cetera. And that's the common denominator.
Speaking of board, I want to change the topic a little bit because you're on a million boards. Like there's a Menlo School. I feel like personally I'm focusing on that because of like living in the Bay Area. I know that's like where all the VC went to school. But and then you were on like the board of Silicon Valley Leadership Group, California Business Roundtable, California Academy of Science. Well, I love that. And then US Ski and Snowboard and ISF Opera. Okay, just name a board you're not in. Can we just talk about that? How do you be on the board of so many companies and so many organizations? And how do you kind of like divide your time to, I guess, be on these boards?
Well, let me clarify that. I think you've given a lovely sort of review of my life over the last 20 years, but those were more sequential than all at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's impossible. And you do see people sort of collecting not-for-profit boards. My personal opinion is you can't really do more than 2 not-for-profit boards and a day job and do them well. Now, I'm sure others would disagree with that, but that was at least my own experience. That while I was and am working full time at McKinsey, I could do 2 not-for-profits at the same time and be meaningful, not just show up periodically for the board meetings and write a check. But I found that to be really critical to for me. That's been, has, and will continue to be very important. So I'm on the board of the U.S. ski team, U.S. ski and snowboard, I should say, now, and I'm on the board of Wake Forest University now, but no other not-for-profits, just those 2. And the list you gave us a number of things I've done prior to that, and I've gotten enormous psychic satisfaction. It was a great way to get this, stay engaged, contribute to a community that in some cases was my own. And I'm not a racer, big skier, never been a racer, but it's really fun to work with a set of other super committed board members to try to move the U.S. ski and snowboard team forward from behind the scenes, right? None of us are actually out there on the snow. We're providing the funding and providing the governance. And so these things are a blast, but if you're going to do them, you really need, in my opinion, you need to do them. Don't sort of put your name on the letterhead and not do much.
What is it like? What does it mean? So, okay. So you mentioned about like helping them, I guess, get funding as well as like moving things forward. So for example, you are on the board of Wake Forest University. Like, how do you think about that? Like, I mean, what does that mean to be on a board? Do you have to go to board meeting every week and then be like, hey, here's like the new president we need to hire tomorrow? Like, what's the kind of like vibe there?
Well, it's funny. So I'm actually leaving tomorrow to fly back to Winston-Salem for a quarterly board meeting at Wake Forest.
Wow. That's
highly powerful. Yes. So these, all of these not-for-profit boards have a fundraising component, but
Okay.
It's very different than a for-profit board because you pay for the privilege of being on the board. But they also do, they will take from you as much as you're willing. Well, they'll definitely take as much money as you're willing to give. But then more importantly, they'll take from you whatever time and expertise you're willing to give. And so there's, at some level in every case, just like a for-profit board, your highest duty is making sure that you've got the right CEO in place, and if not,
Mhm.
solving that problem. But then beyond that, you've got an opportunity to weigh in. So in the case like Wake Forest, an opportunity to weigh in on where's the school going? What do we
Mhm.
want to accomplish? What to be beyond what the president and in this case Wake Forest, they call it the cabinet, the direct reports, they use us as a sounding board to say, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? Do you think this works? And if not, how would we change it? And it's everything from student life through the facilities of the
Mhm.
university. Just like a for-profit board, management is responsible for running the entity. You are not, as a board member,
Mhm.
you do not run it, but you are in a position where you can provide some real advice and oversight. And that's the fun part of it.
Mhm. Um, is this compensated, or is this like kind of like a since is this considered nonprofit, or how does it work from as a board member?
For these boards you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
these are all not for profit. So that's for McKinsey, we are not allowed, and this is to differing degrees true
Mhm.
for almost other consulting firms. We're not allowed to serve on for-profit boards while you're full-time at the firm. The one exception to that is in your last year at McKinsey, you're able to start joining for-profit boards just to ease your transition
Mhm.
out the
Mhm.
door. For me, that's been a big positive. My biggest fear probably
Mhm.
was waking up at 60 years old, getting fired from my day job, and then going, okay, now what do I do? And
Oh, wow.
so we're allowed to start joining for-profit boards in the last year, but all these not-for-profits, no, they're, as I say, not only do you not get paid to be part of them, but you typically pay for the privilege of being part of
Mm.
them, because you've got to be a real donor if you're going to, within whatever your means are. But you need to make a meaningful economic contribution to these not-for-profits.
Wow, okay, so wow, stuff to worry about when I'm 55, but
You can do it sooner, Grace. I mean, it's funny.
no.
I did my first not-for-profit, the SPCA, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in San
Mm.
Francisco. I think I joined that 25 years ago, probably. And it was somebody that I knew socially and said, hey, we need another board member. Would you be interested? My wife and I have been big animal lovers, big dog people. And so I joined and was a member for about 5 or 6 years. I felt like I, made a meaningful intellectual contribution. At that time, economic contribution was pretty minor relative to the other board members. So, if you want to get involved civically, you can do it at any age. You just have to have enough time to be able to commit to the board meetings themselves and the stuff that happens in between.
Mm. I'm sure you're unofficially probably coaching a lot of like founders and investors. What are something that you feel like are things that people never pay attention to, but like actually critical about their business?
Creates, I missed the word.
Like critical, like something that's like, I guess like really important for the business, but like obviously the startup founders and VCs always miss.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much advice that startups and founders get now. I think it's different than 25 years ago, where it was easy to miss
Mhm.
stuff because 25, I'm actually probably longer than that, 35 years ago, because, the notion of a startup, I'm not even sure we fully had that phrase. And so I don't think there's a bunch of stuff that is universally missed. There's not sort of a common pattern. I think every individual has blind spots. And typically, the biggest blind spot I see is we are most attracted and most impressed by people who seem most similar to us or most similar to what we have in our head of what a successful executive looks like. And those become the things we optimize around. And the blind spot is not seeing that there's somebody else or set of other people that can look, seem, and be totally different than our vision of what you know of what we're looking for, but could be an incredibly important part of our venture. And so the trick is to be able to move beyond your own managerial or attribute, is probably a better way to say it, blind spots of
Mhm.
just because they don't seem to have these types of characteristics for this role, they may be the perfect person and it's a different set of characteristics. And I need to be able to flex my own mindset around what success and talent looks like depending on what I'm looking for.
Speaking of finding, basically you're saying you should find the advice or something that may be like opposite of who you are, and having like a using your word holistic or wholesome opinion about your business. And I wonder, how do you think about like people creating a good culture and a good team, especially from the founder perspective? Like, who's supposed to be your co-founder? How do you kind of examine if they could be a good co-founder? Because I feel like co-founder breakup, it's like one of the most like, it's like worse than running out of money. A YC founder told me that like one of their badge, like I mean, most of their badges because of like co-founder breakup or like some critical stuff that like actually running out of money. But just curious on your thought on that.
Yeah, I don't have a clean answer to that. I mean, my not having ever founded a company, it's that's one kind of beyond my personal experience base. I've watched from a distance. I watched even my father, who was actually an entrepreneur within the clothing industry. The greatest business he ever built, he and his co-founder had a massive falling out, and ultimately he left. The business ended up dying a couple. It was a very sad story, and all the things he did, that was the one. And he and his co-founder had completely different temperaments and completely different skill base. My dad was much more of a business guy. His co-founder was much more of a creative. It should have been a match made in heaven, but it became like a bad marriage,
Oh no.
and very messy when it broke up. And as I say, in some ways, the most exciting stories can become the most sad stories, because you have two people that are very diverse in terms of their skills and capabilities, and then just can't figure out how to keep getting along. But there's another part of your question I think I can answer probably a little better. I'm a big believer in what I call, and I stole this phrase from somewhere, I read it, black licorice cultures. That great companies have black licorice culture. Not everybody likes black licorice, but if you like it, you like it. It's different than red licorice, right? It's hard not to kind of like, unless you really don't like red food dye, not to like the taste of red licorice. But black licorice is a very particular taste. And I believe great companies have great cultures, and those cultures are not going to be to everybody's taste. And the trick, on the part of the company and the part of the individual, is to know, hopefully before you join, but if you do join, relatively quickly, that this is not the culture you're looking for. And so they're not trying to please everybody. They're not trying to please all their employees. They're not even trying to please all their customers. They're trying to please the set of people that get what they're doing and are excited about what they're doing, and it fits for them.
Wow. I've never heard about that, but like I feel like that. So basically, you're saying like your company's supposed to create like a really unique culture. People either love or like not love it. I feel like this applies to like as a content creator. I feel like this totally applies to the content world too, just because like the world is kind of like polarizing. You don't want people to kind of sort of like you. You want people to like absolutely hate you or maybe absolutely love you. Rage bait. But anyway, so I wonder, how do you think about effective management or like managing up too? So like for example, there's a lot of founders that are like, our listeners, they have board member, but they also have like other people that they have managed, like their clients and everyone else. Like I think when everybody agree, that's amazing, right? But like 95% times that people don't agree with each other. Like you mentioned earlier in your like superpower or like the skill that you're constantly trying to improve, how do you kind of like giving other people the contacts or like seeing things from other people's eye? How do you kind of communicate with other people to make it like a effective um work environment when you
Well,
don't agree with something?
think about it. I mean, it's a really interesting question, Grace, because if you think about it, you're, as a CEO, there's this vision of you're the
Mhm,
individual, the man and the woman at the top of the chain. But in
mhm,
some ways, you could actually reimagine it as you're a little cog in a
mhm,
wheel that includes your customers or client, your employees, your peers, your board, and you're the little cog that's trying to keep all of that moving. And so you need to recognize that there, going back to this black licorice thing, you have to have a vision of what you're trying to create. You
mhm,
have to be authentic to how you're trying to do that. And you need to be able to share that with all of the people in that orbit, everybody I described, and then some. By the way, I didn't include regulators and government, your next door neighbors, and
Oh yeah.
the whole package. But you don't have to use the same words to describe it for everybody. You need to. This is where it comes to sort of meet people where they are. What you need to say to inspire frontline workers can be different than what you need to say to inspire your board, can be different than what you need to say to get the regulators to understand what you're doing. But it's all got to come from the same place. It can't be a whole different set of stories. It can be said in different ways so that it resonates with particularly different audiences, but it's all got to come from that, a constant source of truth. Otherwise, it will blow up on you. And that's where people get themselves in trouble, where different messages to different people that actually aren't consistent with the totality of what they're doing, that becomes a big problem. But you can use different words to make sure that the message is understood and resonate for different audiences.
Mm. I guess like how do you context switch really fast because you have to just like research and communicate and back to back meetings, and how do you kind of like manage your thought process?
That is something to your earlier question that I'm still learning over time. Definitely gotten better at it. I used to be at finish a meeting, and if it was a bad meeting and hadn't gone well, I'd still be fully wound up and be locked into that moment. And now, boom, and my assistant has gotten a little lighter on me in terms of not scheduling them. Like the moment one ends, the next one begins. I get a little grace period in between to regroup, but not much. And so that's got to be a conscious act. You can't sort of move from, at least I can't move from meeting to meeting without consciously doing a little bit of a reset. And if you don't do it in between, you're going to be doing it for the first 15 minutes of you're still stuck in the past. Well, you need to be 100% present for whatever happens next. And so I've also gotten a little smarter about scheduling. So if I know I'm going to have a tough meeting, or I know, then I won't schedule something either immediately afterwards or immediately before. I'll give myself 10 minutes, 15 minutes to get my head around what I'm going to be doing, or 10 or 15 minutes to decompress from what I just did. But if I don't think, the problem is where you get surprised. You think something's going to be straightforward. You're book, boom, 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 and it's not. And I also try to be pretty ruthless about running on time. I think one of the rudest things you can do is leave a room of people waiting for you. And so if you schedule something, you got to be on time. And you may not have more than 2 minutes just to switch your frame of compartmentalize what just happened and now move on to the next. But you have to consciously do it. It won't just happen. If you try to just let it happen, you will be bleeding in from meeting to meeting, from one end to the next.
Wow, that's a lot of like management goes into it. How do you convince the best founders that to take your check? Sorry, my brain is like all over the place.
That's going to places that have not been my own Remember, I'm not funding anybody.
Right.
So,
yeah.
The only thing I've ever had to convince founders to do is to write me a check for helping, as
Oh,
opposed
wow.
to
That's a skill. That's an important skill, though.
Listen, we're all selling. I put quotes around it in some form or another. McKinsey at its best is we're working with companies to help them figure out what they and we can do to move the company forward. And so it's it's problem solution as opposed to selling. But
Right.
but you need to be compelling to them and to yourself about what the opportunity is, and therefore the best way to go at it. But thankfully, I've never had to convince a founder to take my check.
Okay, I have a question for you. So, McKinsey is famous for like consulting people, and I feel like, as you mentioned, like, sometimes you guys research the company before, pitching them or like telling them you need our service. How do you do the research prior to having the information from their own company?
Well, it's funny. You talk about the arc of my career.
Mhm.
Back when I started at McKinsey, if you wanted to research a company outside in, You went to physical. We used to have something called libraries, and they were
Mhm.
actually physical libraries with magazines and journals, etc. And you would go in and you would do research like you used to do. And this is probably
Mhm.
totally, it doesn't connect at all, but
No,
just like,
I go to library every week because yeah, I have a 1-year-old. I send him to the library. My first job is at the library, so like no
okay,
need
so
to
you
join the
get
library
what they
for
look
me.
like and that there's books
Yeah.
on shelves, et cetera.
Mhm.
That was kind of how it, when I started at McKinsey, that was what we used. And you would, they were organized and there was a librarian and you would say, I'm
Mhm.
trying to understand the aerospace industry. And
Mhm.
he or she would say, well, it's in that section of the library, and you go through
Mhm.
it. And it could take a month to get smart on a company. Now, if I want to get smart on a company or an industry, there's about 80,000 different, periodicals or organizations that I can get access to, in one stroke of the proverbial computer. So it's pretty easy to get smart on a company outside in. What you have to be really careful of, though, is assuming that you, in some way, by virtue of what you've done, understand that company better than the people who work there. And the dumbest thing you can do is go into a company that you've never spent any time with and say, I'm confident that the following three things are going to dramatically improve your company without having any idea what it's like from the inside out. So
Mhm.
what you're really doing is getting smart enough to have a conversation about, I understand your business outside in, I understand your industry outside in. Here's some things we've seen help with others, but we should have a real conversation about what might work for you and what might not work for you.
I wonder, so is there like, so when you say got smart, what are the things that you need to have the conversation? Is that from the business level or is this from like the technical level? Because I feel like when you're chatting with technical founders, you need a lot of like domain expertise knowledge. But if you're chatting with like a regular founder, the consumer tech founders or whatever, like people are more drawn to the business. Like, I guess, like, how do you teach yourself? And then what part do you really focus on to like demonstrate your ability to help?
Well, so my experience, and others may be different, is
Mhm.
particularly if you're talking to a technical company, a biotech company, you can kind of go through the different that are more technical and less. What would be the right word? The word? Well, more technical and less technical, for lack of a better way to
Okay.
describe it. More technical and less technical. You've got to be competent enough in understanding what they do and how the technology works or is meant to work to be credible, but
Mhm.
never try to out techno a techno person. It's
Mhm.
not a great. It rarely leads to a great interaction,
Mhm.
and it's not what we do.
Mhm.
And we've got deeply technical people that can
Mhm.
help do everything from an oil and gas refinery optimization project and doing the linear program to be able to do that. But that's not sort of the leading card. It's a capability. And so our my mindset around this has always been, we are most likely to help you on the stuff that you are least comfortable, that you know how to do well. So if you're deeply technical and you know how to do all the tech, we're not going to come in and try to tell you that's the place we're going to help. We may ultimately help you there, but we've got to build our credibility first. So we'll come help you on something you may not know how to do go to market.
Mhm.
You're a scientist or an engineer by training. You understand the product and how the product's meant to work better than anybody. We're not going to try to do product redesign with you, but we'll help you figure out what the market looks like and how to go to market. And so my experience has been the best way to get to know a company is on something they're uncomfortable with rather than something they're comfortable with. And then you may ultimately help them with something they're comfortable with too, because you and they realize there's an opportunity to do that even better.
Oh, wow. That's so deep. I'm literally taking notes about the uncomfortable and comfortable part. Um, okay, so another question is like, okay, what is the skills that you feel like actually is essential for the next generation of businesses? Since like right now we have ChatGPT, so you don't need like a biotech degree to build a biotech company anymore. But I mean, speaking of people with absolutely no experience, but anyway,
Yeah,
so
you probably still do. If you're
yeah.
actually you need scientists to do scientific
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
if the heart of your question, Grace, is kind of what's the next generation of skills that are going to be required, I'm going to give you an honest answer. I have no idea. I mean, there's that great scene in The Graduate where the fella says to Dustin Hoffman, plastics, plastics. And, who would have, well, I'm sure somebody, but I certainly would have been the person that would have told you 2 years ago, understanding how to do prompts for generative AI is going to be a critically important skill over the course of the next 5 years and maybe next 50. So it's really, I'm sure better minds than mine could answer that question. I do think if what you want to do is build and run a company, then there's a set of leadership skills that are going to be they were critical before and they're going to be critical going forward. And I don't think that changes. I don't know what the next sort of most important technical skill, I couldn't even guess what that might be. But, the core leadership skills of having a vision, being authentic to that vision, being able to inspire and communicate with others around that, and then being able to take it down to tactically, what do we do and not do? That sort of mindset, I think that's going to be it's critical skill now for leaders, and it's going to be a critical skill forever for leaders.
What are something that you would do to improve these core skills? Like, for example, having a vision. Like, is that just like watching movies or something? Like, how do you have a vision for something? Because I feel like having learning about the tactical, obviously that's important. Like, you could just do that by like doing stuff, but being authentic, that's easy. Like, people can just, I don't know, be themselves, like chill. But I feel like having a vision and being inspiring is something that like you could technically use practice. I don't know if how you practice them, but is there any like advice on like how to be like a charismatic leader, convince people to do things that they hate, or like what are the stuff that like is there any lessons on that?
Yeah, I think some of this stuff is hard to teach in a formal sense. It's definitely teachable, and there are. I mean, I was a guest lecturer for a class on how to use humor in business. Now, that was at Stanford Business School. Now, I wouldn't have thought that would be a whole class, but it turns out it is a class there. I don't think I was particularly funny, but I talked about what it might be like to be funny and use it. So I think there's a set of skills that you can use as part of your arsenal of leadership weapons that you can teach is maybe too strong a word, but help inform, help add to the set of things you might naturally do. I don't think you can teach charisma per se, although if you go all the way back to Dale Carnegie's book of how to win friends and influence people. He certainly thought it was teachable. My oldest daughter read it when she was young and found it quite compelling. So I do think there's a set of things you can learn to do and maybe as importantly, not do, that makes you more compelling as a leader. But I think there's a lot of just paying attention to the people you respect in your organization and outside your organization. You learn a ton from just watching somebody do it well. And you only learn if you actually pay attention. You don't just pick it up through osmosis. You actually go, God, that was really good when they did that. I'm gonna take a little mental note or physical note of, and I learned a ton from people at McKinsey. Probably had no idea I was actually learning from them. When I watched somebody steer a conversation that was going the wrong direction back into something that was productive, what did they say to be able to convert this to that? And boom, mental note. Okay, now I'm gonna and you collect enough of those mental notes, and that starts to become a part of your own leadership style.
What is some behavior that you personally implement into your personal, I guess, like behavior diet, slash content diet? So like, for example, okay, so you notice so and so who is a great leader do what, and then you decided to like implement this into your daily routine.
Well, I wouldn't say daily routine. I'd say more, the selective use. I mean, I can, daily routine is a little more tactical. We now call them hacks. And so, hacks are actually, my wife gives me a hard time about this. Take a look at your calendar, not just the night before for the next day. You might take a look on Sunday and make sure the whole week actually makes sense. Silly little example of that is also make sure you've got sources of energy. There's a lot of what you do that can suck energy away. So if I look and I go, boy, that week, I'm going to halfway through the week, and I don't mean just physically, I also mean mentally and emotionally. I'm going to be ready to crawl up in a little ball and be done. But then the back half of the week is just as bad. Figure out how you either reduce some of that pressure or add some stuff into it that gives you energy. So there's a set of hacks like that, but there's also, the stuff that I say is a little more selective. Like being vulnerable is a really incredible skill if you learn to accept it. I don't even think it's much doing it, accept it. In a conversation where you're trying to convince somebody of something, if the entire conversation is about you pushing, as opposed to you saying, listen, here's a couple things I've gotten wrong, and it's got to be authentic, but that allows you to connect with somebody that you're trying to tell them something hard, but you're also giving them something hard about yourself. Those are things, it's not like you use it every day, but it's a very powerful way to equalize the conversation, as opposed to being senior person to junior person, but saying, we're all in this together. Let me give you an example of when I messed something up. I know you messed that up. We'll get through this, but let's be honest. That's what happened. Now we got to, move forward together.
Okay, so this is like a random thought in my head. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but okay. So if you're to build like a McKinsey from scratch today, what would you do?
Well,
You're already
I'm happy to answer. I just don't have a good one off the top of my head because listen, we're hitting on 100 years. And pretty cool. I don't think if you were building it from scratch, you'd have to give yourself at least another 50 years. To get it. If I were building a new McKinsey today, I'd probably actually build it more for fun to be focused on the world you're describing. The founder, VC, startup. Could you design a consulting firm that actually worked entirely with early stage companies? Could you figure out how to make that work? And then I'd focus it there because I think it'd be really fun. And then you let that kind of scale as the companies you're helping and see where it goes. I don't think I would try to design McKinsey from scratch to do what we do now. The ketchup would just be too hard. Right?
No. I definitely don't think the new McKinsey should be the McKinsey of today. Like, why do you build the same thing over and over again? But I guess
given we have it already.
The concept of like building a great consulting practice.
Yeah. So first you'd actually start with a need, which is what either part of the ecosystem, called business or commercial ecosystem of the world needs help that isn't getting it now in some meaningful way. And that's in a sense part of why I thought about the more early stage community, because we can only do so much work given our cost structure and the nature of what we do and how we do it. But I do think there's a lot of early stage companies that could use help beyond what they might be getting from their venture-backed founders. And so I think that'd be a really neat niche to build around. But you'd have to build it in such a way that it was economic for the companies you were working with in a world where cash flow is highly constrained. And at the same time, economic for you as a firm in a world where you need to feed your children. So it probably gets built by people who don't have children to feed, and that look a lot more like the startup founders, right? Where everybody's kind of in it together, and you're just doing it across a portfolio of different companies. And if something kicks, then boom, now you're ready to have a family.
Well, that hits hard. But anyway, okay. Let's wrap up with like a quick 1 minute fire round. What's your favorite book?
I'm going to give you a favorite author rather than a favorite book because I've liked virtually everything Jonathan Franzen's written, and I'm waiting for his next novel to come out. It's been about 7 or 8 years. The Corrections I thought was one of the great ones. So, all right, rapid fire. But Jonathan Franzen, author.
Wait, what is that?
So Jonathan,
what is he write?
He's actually been both an essayist and a columnist, but also an author going back. Probably his first book was 15 years ago. They're each one feels a little different than the one before, and they get at sort of American truths. He was trying to write his version of the great American novel. None have been made into movies. I'd ask your listeners to Google them. If I can do a plug for Jonathan Friends, and I will.
Oh wow, I will totally research that. Okay, who would you invite to your dinner party?
To a dinner party? Um, my parents and my wife's parents, all four have passed away. It would be really fun to get them all back together again.
Oh wow. Um, who made the biggest impact in your career?
Senior partner has passed away also. I don't mean that to be a theme. A fellow named Bill Meehan. He somewhere along the way he decided I was worth betting on. And you asked earlier about board of advisors. Bill, in some ways, was a whole board of advisors for me. He was a mentor. He was a sponsor. He played multiple different roles in my career, both when he was at the firm and then when he left, and was ultimately teaching at the GSB. And he passed away far too young from MS.
I guess like what are something that he sees in you?
I wish I could ask him that question. I think a combination of potential to be more than just what was visible. That I think he saw that. I don't, but there was some raw talent there, but that it could be something more if I was willing to aspire to it. I had one meeting with Bill years ago where he looked at me and he said, "You're not living up to your potential." And it was like, wow. And my parents used to say that to me too. So I think it hit at a level that he hadn't quite done. But he said, you're doing well, but you're not nearly doing what you could do. So figure out what you want to aspire to, because you're not aspiring enough. And as a result, you're doing just fine. And you could be doing a lot better than just fine.
Oh, I feel like you're doing beyond fine, but where can we find
you? Well, partially due to Bill, right? That conversation was a while ago.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Say again, Grace?
Where can we find you outside of work?
Well, I mentioned the not-for-profit stuff, so depending on when, I could be involved with that. But big skier, somewhere between a mediocre and a terrible golfer, but love getting out on the course at least once a week. We love going to Tahoe in the summer, where we spend now, or will spend basically a good part of the summer. And then we have a home in Africa, in Kenya, in the Masai Mara. And so you'll be finding us spending a lot more time there once I'm officially retired from McKinsey.
Wow. Will you be riding on an elephant there, or what's
Not an elephant, but we do have horses.
Okay. Well, Gary,
we'll avoid the elephants there. They're fabulous to look at, but a little dangerous if you get them mad. So.
Speaking of people with experience, but anyway, Gary, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Grace, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Let me quickly answer.